You never really forget the way people look at you like you've stolen something when you're just standing still. Branch 327, Moby Bank, Alabama, 3:42 p.m. A woman in her 40s stands quietly under fluorescent lights, flanked by two security guards. She's not yelling. She's not resisting. She's just standing in the middle of a banking hall, under dozens of watching eyes, and in a world that assumes she doesn't belong. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us. You're not authorized to access this account. She turns her head slowly as if every movement must be calculated. One hand holding her wallet, the other wearing a tarnished silver ring. There's a faint scar across her knuckle like someone who's worked with her hands more than people would expect. No one knows who she is, but they're about to find out. Because the woman they're escorting out is Camille Hartwell, regional chair, the highest-ranking executive within a 300-mile radius of this tiny Moby Bank branch, and the account they just flagged as suspicious. It's hers. Welcome to Unveiled Wealth, where every story doesn't just entertain, it exposes what power tries to hide. If this is your first time here, welcome. And if you already know how we tell stories, then you know. We don't make videos to entertain. We tell stories to awaken. 3 minutes earlier, Camille had simply walked in with one request, a cash withdrawal from her personal account, one she hadn't touched in over 3 months. She came alone. No assistant, no notice, no designer, anything. Just a sand-colored blouse, a worn canvas tote, and a pair of leather flats that had clearly outlived their shape. The air conditioning in the lobby rattled. The carpet smelled faintly of dust. A printer spit out receipts in dry, clipped rhythms. A regular bank, a routine transaction. And yet, Camille Hartwell was not born into money. She was born into missed payments, broken heaters, and a father who never trusted banks after they bounced a check with his name on it, even though the money was right there. She remembered that winter clearly, not because of the cold, but because of the silence that followed it. Her dad had walked into a branch just like this one, asked to withdraw $40, and walked out humiliated. The teller had called for verification. The manager had declined the request, and no one had explained why. She was 11. She never forgot. That memory wasn't why she built her career in finance, but it's why she built it the way she did, quietly, deliberately, and with a long memory. Camille didn't want to run banks. She wanted to understand why some doors opened and some didn't. She didn't come from a business school pipeline. She didn't wear the badges or the family crest. She didn't network at yacht clubs. Camille got her first break working nights at a call center for Bank West. Not to learn finance, just to pay rent. But she listened to the angry customers, to the fearful ones, to the elderly who needed help resetting passwords. She started asking questions no one else was asking, and people noticed. 10 years later, Camille stood at the top of the very system that once made her father feel small. But power wasn't the goal. Perspective was. So when she decided to visit Moby Bank Branch 327 without telling a soul, it wasn't random. It was a test. She left her title at home. She left her name badge in her drawer. And she chose this branch specifically not because it had the lowest numbers or the highest turnover, but because it looked normal. Normal was where culture lived. Not in boardrooms, not in memos, but in the spaces where people stopped looking over their shoulders and just act. Today, she wasn't looking for a scandal. She was looking for a pattern. She didn't need them to recognize her. She needed to know what they assumed. Camille waited in line like anyone else. A man in a neon landscaping shirt was ahead of her, cracking jokes with the teller while filling out a deposit slip. He laughed. She laughed. And the transaction carried on. It was a normal afternoon at Moby Bank Branch 327, too normal. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a clinical glow across the marbled floor. The carpet smelled faintly of dust, disinfectant, and old air conditioning. Somewhere behind the counter, a receipt printer clicked to life, spitting out a thin slip of numbers with a soft mechanical sigh. To Camille's left, an older woman was on speakerphone, whispering something about overdraft fees, while flipping through a worn-out checkbook with a trembling hand. Behind her, a child tapped the metal pole of the cue divider over and over, the quiet ting, 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 slowly drilling its way into the air. No one looked up. No one noticed her. When her turn came, Camille stepped forward with a practiced smile. Calm, respectful, unbothered. Good afternoon. I'd like to make a withdrawal from my personal account. The teller, a young woman with glossy bangs and a name tag that read Sherry, nodded without hesitation. Of course. May I see your ID and account number? Camille handed both over with the ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. No rush, no anxiety, no reason for alarm. But before Sherry could even reach for her keyboard, a voice cut in from behind the frosted glass of the side office. Excuse me, I'll take this. The voice was smooth, controlled, but it had that tone, that slight uptick at the end, like it was used to being the final word in the room. A man stepped out from the side door, adjusting his tie. Thin-rimmed glasses, maroon tie tucked neatly into a charcoal vest. Clipboard in one hand, authority in the other. His shoes clicked too cleanly on the floor, not loud, but deliberate. He didn't look at Sherry. He looked straight at Camille, then at her ID, then back at her face. I'm sorry, he said, voice light but final. We can't process this withdrawal today. Camille blinked. I'm sorry, what seems to be the issue? He didn't answer her question, not directly. Instead, he smiled. The kind of smile that says, I've seen this before. Let's just say we've had some incidents. People pretending to be someone they're not. Large withdrawals. You know how it is. Camille tilted her head slightly. Not aggressive, just curious. My account is in good standing. I can provide additional verification if needed. But he didn't ask for any. Instead, he stepped closer. Not in a threatening way, but in that casual confidence that only comes from being in charge for too long without being questioned. We've had fraud attempts before, he said, almost conversationally. No offense, ma'am, but we don't just take people's word for it. And this ID, he paused, his eyes scanning the laminate card, doesn't quite look like you. Just enough doubt, just enough distance. Camille didn't flinch, but she felt it, the shift in the air. Sherry's hands were still on the keyboard, frozen mid-motion. The man in the neon shirt stopped joking. Even the tapping child behind her went quiet. She looked at the man again, calmly. No anger, just calculation. Stephen, is it? She asked, reading the name off his badge. He nodded sharply, already turning to step back, as if the matter had been decided the moment he entered the room. Only then did Camille notice the small things. The corner of his office window covered with a privacy film. The carefully curated posters on the wall, all about fraud prevention and identifying red flags. The framed certificate behind his desk, positioned just high enough for every customer to see. Stephen Aldridge wasn't just a manager. He was a man who built his identity on being right before checking if he was. And today, in front of a woman he didn't recognize, he had already made up his mind. But Camille had walked into too many rooms like this before, and she never walked out the same way twice. Stephen hadn't raised his voice. Not once. But somehow, the whole room knew who was in charge. Camille stood calmly, watching as he placed her ID back on the counter, not in her hand, just down, like it didn't belong to her. We recommend setting an appointment for large withdrawals, he said, flipping his clipboard with a well-practiced flick. It's just policy. No one mentioned that when I walked in, she replied evenly. Stephen smiled. We're mentioning it now. And just like that, her presence became a disruption, a ripple, something to be managed. Sherry, still behind the glass, glanced nervously between them. Her fingers hovered near the keyboard, but never touched it again. A man in the waiting area shifted his leg off the coffee table, suddenly aware of the room. Another teller, Corey, mid-30s, sleeves rolled up, phone tucked in his back pocket, peeked over, but didn't move. Just watched. And here's the thing, no one tells you about power dynamics in polite places. It's not about shouting. It's about how many people stop blinking when someone in a tie makes a decision. Stephen stepped back, nodding as if he just prevented a crime. Sherry, he said, not looking at Camille. I'll let security handle this. Camille tilted her head. Security. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Two men in plain navy polos emerged from the back, not storming in, just appearing, like they'd been waiting for a signal. The shorter one tapped his earpiece. The taller one looked straight at her. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us. There was no accusation in his voice, but no invitation either. The room shifted. A woman with a stroller lowered her phone. The tapping kid from earlier leaned into his mom. Corey stood a little straighter. Camille didn't raise her voice. She didn't reach for anything. One hand on her tote, but the other resting gently on the counter. Her ring caught the light, the same silver ring she'd worn for 15 years. She exhaled once. This account, she said, quiet but clear, is under my name. Stephen gave a polite shrug. We're not saying it's not. We're just not confirming it today. And that's when you realize sometimes you don't need to be dragged out to be erased. All it takes is someone with just enough authority to decide. You don't fit the picture they're used to seeing. And once that decision is made, it spreads. Through the eyes of the tellers, through the silence of the customers, through the way no one asks any more questions. Camille turned to the two security guards. Her voice didn't waver. Let's go. Then, because she knew they hadn't embarrassed her, they had exposed themselves. They walked her past the front desk, past the waiting chairs, past the scrolling eyes that quickly looked away when she glanced in their direction. Camille didn't protest, not because she agreed, but because sometimes silence says more than words. They didn't take her far, just to the hallway near the manager's office. One of the guards stayed with her while the other went to get Stephen. That's when it happened. Sherry, the young teller from before, stood up. She didn't make a scene. She didn't yell. She just walked around the counter and approached the hallway. Slowly, nervously. Stephen, she called out. He turned, clipboard still in hand, a little annoyed. Yes, I just double-checked her account. Sherry said, it's valid, and her name matches the ID. Stephen didn't blink, didn't thank her. Just stared. We'll handle it internally, he said, but Sherry didn't move. She listed as an executive tier client. Stephen's jaw tightened. Sherry. She's the CEO. That silenced even the security guard next to Camille. The hallway felt colder. Stephen's smile was gone now. His voice clipped. Are we really just taking people's word for it now? She walks in off the street. No appointment. Dressed like... He stopped himself. But it was too late. Sherry flinched. So did the younger guard. It was a strange thing, watching a room change temperature without anyone touching the thermostat. But that's exactly what happened. And here's the part they don't train for in corporate onboarding. When someone dares to poke a hole in the assumption, the whole building holds its breath. Camille turned slightly, not towards Stephen, but towards Sherry. Thank you, she said. Sherry nodded. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice was firm. I just thought, if it were me, I'd want someone to double-check. Stephen scoffed, trying to laugh it off. Well, lucky for us, you're not in charge. And that's when the second voice chimed in. It came from Corey, the other teller, the one who'd stayed quiet earlier, now standing in the doorway, arms crossed. Maybe she is, he said. Everyone turned. Corey took one slow step forward. His tone wasn't angry, just tired. I saw her speak at the Phoenix conference about ethical leadership. He looked at Camille. You talked about how quiet culture becomes toxic when no one speaks up. Camille didn't say anything, but her eyes met his, and that was enough. Stephen stepped back into his office, but this time, he left the door open, because now the room was watching him. The room was still, not tense. The ear one was not loud, just enough. Still, Stephen had disappeared into his office. Sherry had returned to her terminal, fingers fidgeting but not typing. Corey stood frozen, one hand still resting on the counter like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to sit down yet. Camille hadn't moved. Her posture was relaxed, but not casual, like someone who knew they were being watched and had decided to let the silence do the work. That's when the voice came, not from a manager, not from staff, but from a customer. An elderly woman, no taller than 5 feet, slowly pushed herself up from one of the vinyl lobby chairs. She had a cane in one hand and a checkbook clutched tightly in the other. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the air like a chisel. Sweetheart, you okay? Camille turned toward her, surprised. That man, the woman said, nodding slightly toward Stephen's office. He was out of line. A few heads turned. The woman didn't care. She took one careful step forward, her cane clicking softly on the tile. Back in my day, she added, you still had to treat people decent before you knew who they were. The lobby shifted. Even the security guard cleared his throat and looked away. Camille smiled gently. Thank you. I'm handling it. The woman nodded. I know you are. When the reliever doesn't mean you should have to do it alone. She didn't say anything else. She just turned, slowly, and sat back down. But the damage was done. The lobby didn't just feel different now. It was different. Because when someone who's not part of the hierarchy speaks up without being asked, it reframes everything. Sherry glanced at Camille, then at the woman. Then at Stephen's office. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but didn't know how. Camille broke the silence. May I finish the withdrawal process now? Sherry hesitated, then nodded. Yes, ma'am, of course. But the words landed differently now. Not out of protocol, but out of recognition. Because the moment that woman stood up, the branch stopped being a place of control and started being a place of truth. At the far end of the lobby, near the brochure rack no one ever touched, a girl sat frozen. She couldn't have been older than 16. Her hoodie was 2 sizes too big, sleeves chewed at the ends. A chipped library card dangled from her backpack zipper. She looked like she'd come in to wait for someone, not to witness the unraveling of a system. But sometimes, the smallest eyes see the sharpest truths. Camille noticed her only now, not because of her clothes or her silence, but because she was staring. Not in awe, not in fear, just locked in. The girl stood slowly, like someone walking into a classroom late. Her sneakers squeaked, her fingers trembled. But she spoke. Miss, can I say something? Camille turned. Every head did. The girl stepped forward, clutching her phone like it was a shield. Her voice cracked, but it held. I saw what happened. From the beginning, she paused, a single deep breath. I didn't say anything because I didn't think I was allowed to. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but the weight behind it landed hard. I've seen things like that before. At the grocery store where I bag on weekends. At school. Even online. It's always the same. She glanced at Stephen's office. Someone who thinks they know everything. Deciding what you are. Before you say a word. Her lip quivered, but her gaze never dropped. I don't have a bank account. I don't even know how credit works yet. But I know what it feels like when someone pretends you don't belong. Sherry blinked fast. Corey stared. Lips parted. Even the older woman with the cane put her checkbook down. The girl lowered her voice. Almost like a confession. I didn't speak up earlier because I was scared. But I think silence is part of the problem. Camille took a step toward her, not as an executive, but as a mirror. What's your name? Ari, she replied. Ari Jordan. Certainly. Camille nodded. Ari, do you know what you just did? Ari shook her head. You became the one thing they never expect a witness who refuses to stay quiet. The room held its breath, not out of fear, but out of clarity. Because sometimes, it's not the managers or the CEOs who break the silence first. Sometimes, it's the youngest voice in the room. And once that voice is heard, it never goes back to being invisible. Camille didn't smile. She didn't need to. She simply placed a hand on Ari's shoulder and said, you saw it. You felt it. And you spoke, Gikin, sorry boss. Don't ever forget how rare that is. And in that moment, the third predator of silence, the one no one expected, was named. And it looked nothing like a beast. It looked like a teenage girl with bitten sleeves and the courage to speak. Silence, once again, settled over the lobby, but this time, it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that draped over the shoulders like a heavy winter coat. Everyone was still, but not calm. No one knew what to do next. And worse, no one wanted to be the one to find out. Stephen had disappeared behind the glass-paneled office door. It didn't shut completely, just enough for plausible deniability. A coward's half-exit. Camille stood motionless, her phone idle now, fingers slightly curled around it, but not white-knuckled. Not anymore. She had already done her part, and everyone in the building knew that something irreversible had just happened. But the question lingered in the air like static before a storm. Now what? Then, the revolving door creaked open. Not with a gust, not with fanfare, just a man in a coat. He wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't on payroll, wasn't summoned, and certainly hadn't been seen in years. Gray overcoat, older than the branch manager himself. Leather shoes with edges dulled by time. A battered briefcase, the kind made before everything came with a logo. He walked with a subtle limp, the kind that tells you nothing and everything about a man. And the room felt him before they saw him. Camille, he said, not loud but firm. I heard you finally let them see. Heads turned. One of the tellers, Leonard, nearly dropped his clipboard because standing in front of them was Howard Ellis, retired former regional director, the man who ran the entire Southern District for nearly 2 decades, the man who implemented half the security systems still in place, the one who used to train people like Stephen until he didn't. He left quietly 5 years ago. No press release, no farewell cake, just gone. Some said he was pushed out. Others said he left before the bank changed too much for him to stomach. No one expected to see him again, least of all Stephen. The branch manager poked his head from behind the glass. Eyes widened. Howard, this isn't your business anymore. Howard didn't respond. He walked right past the front desk. The guard. The whispers. To Camille, you didn't call me, he said. But I came anyway. Camille raised a brow. I didn't think you were still watching. Howard smirked, not amused. Just aware. The forest doesn't stop echoing just because the hunter leaves it. He reached into his briefcase, not rushed, not dramatic, and pulled out a file. Simple manila. Finoy, Denon. Camille opened it. Inside the frozen transaction logs, annotated, verified, a printed override slip, signed Howard J. Ellis Wentworth. Stephen stepped fully into the room now, voice brittle. You don't have clearance to act on these systems anymore. Howard didn't even look at him. I built those systems. Silence again, but this time, the kind that waits for the punchline. I retired. Stephen, I didn't die. He turned slowly, finally facing the man who had spent all morning unraveling the bank's dignity. You embarrassed this institution. You embarrassed the people in this room. But most of all, you forgot who we serve. Not numbers. People. Stephen scoffed. You're not my boss anymore. Howard's expression didn't change. And you're not a leader. Never were. If we're no man or no. He glanced at the security guard. Escort Mr. Aldridge to gather his things. Quietly. The guard hesitated. Camille didn't do it, she said. That was it? Stephen didn't argue. He just stood for a moment, as if waiting for someone to change their mind. No one did. As he was led to his office, Howard turned back to Camille. You didn't need me to do this, he said. But it helps when the trees remember the sound of a clean shot. He turned to leave, briefcase in hand. But before he reached the door, he paused. Let them feel this. Camille, don't explain it. Don't apologize. The lesson is heavier when it's carried in silence. Camille nodded. And just like that, the hunter left not with glory, but with purpose. The kind you only earn from seeing too much and acting anyway. And what remained in that branch was no longer fear, no longer doubt. It was clarity. And clarity changes everything. There's a certain silence that follows truth. Not the awkward kind, not the heavy kind, but the kind that clears the air like rain after a storm quiet. Clean, undeniable. That's what the lobby of Moby Bank Branch 327 became. Camille didn't raise her voice. She didn't make a speech. She just stood there, still, solid. And somehow, that silence held more gravity than any reprimand could have delivered. No one moved right away. Sherry blinked at her screen but didn't type. Corey folded his arms tighter. The guards glanced at each other, unsure if their job was now to stay or to leave. Stephen, Kuster, Mashkamanonten. He was still behind his glass door, pacing, or maybe unraveling. It didn't matter anymore, because the room no longer followed him. It followed her. Ari, the teenage girl who had dared to speak, had returned to her seat. But now, she wasn't invisible. People saw her, and maybe more importantly, she saw herself. Camille turned toward the counter. Can I complete my withdrawal now? She asked again. This time, Sherry didn't hesitate. Yes, ma'am, she said. But there was something new in her tone, not obedience, not fear, something that sounded like restoration. A moment later, a crisp receipt printed. Camille didn't even glance at the amount. She just folded it once, slipped it into her wallet, and turned. And here's the moment no one expects in these stories. She didn't walk out alone, not physically, but symbolically. When she stepped back across that marble floor, she wasn't the only one who had changed. The atmosphere had shifted, permanently, like something had cracked in the foundation, and now, light was getting in. She passed the elderly woman in the lobby, the one with the cane. They nodded at each other, not as strangers, as veterans of a silent war that most people don't even see. She passed Ari and paused. Camille leaned down slightly, just enough for their eyes to meet again. You didn't just speak for yourself, she said. You spoke for everyone who's ever been dismissed before they could finish a sentence. Ari's hands were still shaking, but she smiled. Small Riccoloana. I think I get it now, she whispered. Camille raised a brow. Get what? That power doesn't always show up loud. Camille straightened. Exactly. She turned one last time, scanning the lobby. Not for spectacle, for memory. Because what had just happened here wasn't just a confrontation. It was a case study, and everyone present had just become part of the footnote. Without saying another word, Camille walked out. The glass doors sighed closed behind her, and the branch of Shutkibuinari it didn't return to normal, because normal had just been rewritten. The lobby was quieter now, not empty, but still, the kind of stillness that doesn't ask questions, it absorbs them. Sherry had returned to her desk, typing slower than usual. Corey stood by the break room doorway, not quite ready to sit. The girl, Ari, had quietly taken her seat again, earbuds in but not playing anything. Camille remained standing. She hadn't said much since the hunter left. She didn't need to. His presence had cleared a path, but hers still set the tone. And now, that tone was reflection. She turned toward the staff, toward the people who were still there, when the dust began to settle. You all saw what happened, she began, calm and one, even, but deliberate to nefernertun. And you're probably wondering what happens next. No one spoke. That's a fair question, she added. But the better one is, why did this happen at all? Corey shifted. Sherry bit her lip. It wasn't just about Stephen, or policy, or systems. It was about default settings, about how we treat people when we're not told who they are. She looked at Sherry. You spoke up, when it counted. That's not protocol, that's character. Then at Corey, you remembered something I said years ago, because it mattered to you. That's what makes culture, not the posters, not the slogans, memory. She stepped forward slightly. I'm not here to fire more people. I'm not here to clean house. I'm here to ask, what kind of house are we trying to live in? The question hovered. Camille glanced around the room, then finally turned to Ari, still pretending to listen to music. And if someone who doesn't even have an account can name the problem before we do, that tells me we've forgotten who we're supposed to serve. No one dared disagree. Across town, at a different branch of Moby Bank, a regional email alert buzzed through terminals. Subject incident report. Internal protocol review required. No details, just a code. Staff started whispering. At headquarters, someone updated Camille's internal profile with a flag on-site exec presence logged. And on social media, a blurry photo had started to circulate. Camille's face in profile. The caption, that lady they escorted out, might have just been our CEO. The comments were split. Some called it staged. Others didn't care. But one user wrote, if she was testing the system, looks like it failed. Another replied, or maybe it passed, because now we know what needs fixing. Back in the branch, Camille picked up her ID from the counter slowly, like it had weight. She looked at it, then slipped it into her wallet. She turned to the staff one last time. I'm going to step out now, but this doesn't end when I leave. She paused at the door. You don't fix a culture by firing people. You fix it by remembering that every person who walks in here has a story. You just saw mine. Don't forget the next one. And with that, she left, not with applause. Not with fear, just with clarity. Because at Unveiled Wealth, we don't tell stories to entertain. We tell them to expose. And the most dangerous system is the one that forgets it's watching real people. So if this made you rethink something today, don't scroll away. Drop a comment. Say what you saw. Say what you've lived. Because silent systems stay broken until someone names the crack. And if that someone is you, good. You're exactly where change begins. By the time the story left the building, it was no longer a story. It was a signal. Not loud, not viral, but precise, like a thread being pulled that makes the whole fabric twitch. An anonymous Reddit post recounted what happened. A blurry photo of Camille went up on Twitter, her face calm, eyes locked on a teller. 2 guards in frame. Someone on TikTok said, I saw a CEO get profiled in real time today, and she didn't flinch. She just let it unfold. The post didn't trend, but it reached the right inboxes. Because when a system breaks quietly, it sends ripples, especially to those trained to listen for the cracks. Within 24 hours, two more branches froze customer accounts under vague suspicion. One of them a retiree named Ellen Chang, who'd been banking there for 19 years. By day 3, the Moby Bank VP of Public Affairs had released a 5-sentence statement. We are aware of an incident involving our executive team. We take our customers' dignity seriously and are reviewing protocols. No names, no details, but everyone knew. The story was out not because Camille shouted it, but because the silence around it had become too loud to ignore. So inside the bank, change didn't arrive with pink slips or reorg memos. It arrived in glances. In the way Sherry now looked customers in the eye longer. In the way Corey asked follow-up questions with more weight behind them. In the way interns were no longer treated like temporary furniture. And Camille, she didn't send an email blast, didn't write a LinkedIn post. She just kept showing up. At meetings, at workshops, at mentoring sessions. Not as the boss, but as the mirror. Because when power gets misused, fixing it isn't about punishment. It's about memory. What they saw that day, how quickly respect dissolved. How easily assumptions replaced facts wouldn't leave them. And that was the point. Ari, the teenager, later received a call, not for a scholarship, not for PR, just an invitation. Camille asked her to speak at the next internal ethics seminar. Because sometimes, the smallest voice in the room carries the clearest echo. And outside the bank, people didn't riot. They didn't boycott. They remembered, which in this world is more dangerous than rage. Because memory builds patterns, and patterns shape pressure. And pressure, not panic, is what makes systems recode themselves. Welcome to Unveiled Wealth, where we don't tell stories to entertain. We tell them to expose. If you've ever seen dignity dismissed with a smile, or watched power pretend it didn't notice what it just did, then this story is yours. 2. Drop a comment. Let's watch and share your voice, or just sit with it for a minute longer than comfort allows. Because silence protects systems, but storytelling exposes them. By the time the story left the building, it was no longer a story. It was a signal, not loud, not viral, but precise, like a thread being pulled that makes the whole fabric twitch. An anonymous Reddit post recounted what happened. A blurry photo of Camille went up on Twitter, her face calm, eyes locked on a teller, 2 guards in frame. Someone on TikTok said, I saw a CEO get profiled in real time today, and she didn't flinch. She just let it unfold. The post didn't trend, but it reached the right inboxes. Because when a system breaks quietly, it sends ripples, especially to those trained to listen for the cracks. Within 24 hours, 2 more branches froze customer accounts under vague suspicion. One of them a retiree named Ellen Chang, who'd been banking there for 19 years. By day 3, the Moby Bank VP of Public Affairs had released a 5-sentence statement. We are aware of an incident involving our executive team. We take our customers' dignity seriously and are reviewing protocols. No names, when in March, no details. But everyone knew. The story was out not because Camille shouted it, but because the silence around it had become too loud to ignore. Inside the bank, change didn't arrive with pink slips or reorg memos. It arrived in glances. In the way Sherry now looked customers in the eye longer. In the way Corey asked follow-up questions with more weight behind them. In the way interns were no longer treated like temporary furniture. And Camille, she didn't send an email blast, didn't write a LinkedIn post. She just kept showing up at meetings, at workshops, at mentoring sessions, not as the boss, but as the mirror. Because when power gets misused, fixing it isn't about punishment. It's about memory. What they saw that day, how quickly respect dissolved, how easily assumptions replaced facts wouldn't leave them. And that was the point. Ari, the teenager, later received a call, not for a scholarship, not for PR, just an invitation. Camille asked her to speak at the next internal ethics seminar, because sometimes the smallest voice in the room carries the clearest echo. And outside the bank, people didn't riot. They didn't boycott. They remembered. Which, in this world, is more dangerous than rage because memory builds patterns, and patterns shape pressure, and pressure, not panic, is what makes systems recode themselves. Welcome to Unveiled Wealth, where we don't tell stories to entertain. We tell them to expose. If you've ever seen dignity dismissed with a smile, or watched power pretend it didn't notice what it just did, then this story is yours. 2. Drop a comment, share your voice, suburban, or just sit with it for a minute longer than comfort allows. Because silence protects systems, but storytelling exposes them.